All right. We are live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. This is Bridging the Gap Between Vulnerability Management and Pen Testing. I'm Ben with Nucleus Security. I'm just here to do some intros and then pass it off to the real experts. So with me today, Scott, co-founder of Nucleus and expert on all things vulnerability management and process, and Phil and Stas, who are co-founders of AttackForge, which is a pen test management and collaboration platform that helps organizations manage their enterprise pen testing programs more effectively, and also great partners of ours. So as you can see, we kind of have experts from both sides here to talk about building that bridge. If you haven't joined us for one of these before, we try to add actual value here, not to use this as a platform to just sell you our services, but to provide perspectives that might make a meaningful impact in your day-to-day life as a practitioner. You're also welcome to buy our services too. We certainly won't stop you, but that's not the goal here. We aim to keep these to 30 or 40 minutes tops. We encourage questions and we'll get to them live if there's time, or we'll follow up afterwards. So anyway, I'll shut up now, pass it over to my friend and colleague, Scott Cooper, to frame out our problem today.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Ben. Really appreciate the intro. Welcome to everybody. It's great that you're here. Thank you very much for joining. The reason we're having this discussion and this webinar is because we've been working with AttackForge for a long while now. And number one, I'm happy that we can make this happen finally. But I really want to talk about something that we've noticed as a really, really big problem for all of our mutual customers. And at a high level, the problem really revolves around visibility. Now, of course, we're going to dive into more of this in depth later on in the presentation. But the end goal of today, as Ben mentioned, is not to really sell you anything, but really to show you and highlight the real, kind of shine a flashlight, if you will, on all of the issues that we're seeing between our mutual customers in relation to this problem that relates around combining vulnerability management with the pen testing workflow. And then ultimately, we're hoping to show you a potential solution that you can use and take back to your organization to start trying to get a handle on all of this information. But to kind of really dive in straight away, the big problem really revolves around visibility. Vulnerability management in itself is a very high-level process that kind of has hands in both the risk management side of the house and in the technical remediation and sort of vulnerability workflow management side of the house. You've got a ton of different users. You have a large number of different fragmented processes that need to be followed. And most of these processes just don't talk to each other. So for example, a vulnerability management program needs to factor in data from all of your vulnerability generation sources. So things like network scanners, your DAST scanners, SAST, cloud, et cetera. Now, obviously, vulnerability management is difficult in a lot of different ways. But today we're going to focus specifically on the challenge that is one of the biggest that we see, which is how do you manage your penetration test data alongside and within the scope of the rest of your vulnerability management program. So currently, as I mentioned, they're extremely fragmented. There are a lot of challenges and downsides that result from just having these separated, but specifically, how do you actually see and measure your risk in relation to penetration tests alongside the rest of your vulnerability management program? And so what we found in all of our customers is that pen testing is actually a completely different segment of the business that has a completely different type of process, completely different goals, and completely different kind of ways of doing their job. So how do you actually reconcile the two is the primary challenge that we're seeing. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Stas, who's going to help kind of frame it from the pen testing side, as opposed to just kind of my limited perspective on the vulnerability management half.
Oh, thank you. So what's pen test? Reports from pen testing are manually written by pen testers, then QA'd by managers, delivered weeks after the actual vulnerability is found. And then vulnerability from those static reports that are fragmented across the enterprise are manually converted into ticketing systems, by that increasing the already high overhead on project teams. It is not practical and not scalable when it is running on an enterprise, when we're running an enterprise penetration testing programs with hundreds of pen tests. As a result, as just been said, penetration testing data is completely disconnected from the rest of vulnerability management. It means it is not visible or tracked across the enterprise. And enterprise cannot measure whether it's getting any better or worse, or where it needs to focus the resources to address the systemic issues uncovered by penetration testing. Back to you, Scott.
Yeah. So if we look at penetration testing program across enterprises, it's usually split into two different streams. So we have a project stream, which deals with all of the projects which are creating new systems, new assets, such as developing a new application. Separately, we have the BAU stream, which deals with existing systems and assets, which have already transitioned into production from the project stream. So when we think about pen testing in an enterprise, it generally looks at both of those streams together. Now, pen testing programs and running those project streams and BAU streams is completely separate, in our experience, to vulnerability management programs in enterprises. So as Scott already mentioned, and Stas as well, having those two running in an organization can be completely isolated teams, isolated visibility. They could be on different parts of the world. So pen testing itself, it's usually performed by the internal security teams. So for some of the larger organizations, they'll have their internal teams of pen testers, but there'll usually be a combination with external consultancies. The problem with that is it makes it really difficult to have a consistent approach to performing an example web application pen test. And it makes it even more difficult for having a consistent language, because each individual pen tester, their organizations, they all have different terminologies, different structures, which finally make its way into the report, which creates a lot of additional complexity to deal with, because we're not talking about apples and apples anymore. So pen testing in the project stream usually happens just before go live. And that creates a significant amount of issues for organizations, specifically around high risk of delays to the go live or launch. Because if we think about a pen test happening, when the product is finally in a production state, at that point in time, the business is getting ready to roll it out. So a pen test comes along, they discover some critical high issues, and all of a sudden developers are scrambling with the days that they have left before planned go live to try and fix issues. So it puts a lot of pressure on engineering teams and the business itself when it comes to risk management around project handover. When we talk about pen testing in the BAU stream, the vulnerabilities which are identified as part of the pen test are potentially exploitable on live systems. Because going back to both streams, the BAU stream deals with those live assets and generally projects which have transitioned into a production and BAU state. So what that means is that as we identify vulnerabilities as part of the BAU stream, there's potentially issues which could be exploitable, and those assets are vulnerable until the risk has been reduced and those issues have been remediated. So traditional pen testing, reports are considered to be the deliverable. So all the emphasis is on the output of that report. Each project produces a report which has to be manually written, manually QA'd. It's delivered days and weeks after the vulnerabilities have been found. So again, we've got pen testers starting a project on day one. They may be already finding some critical high issues that we know need to be fixed. However, that information generally doesn't make its way to the engineering team who need to fix it, for weeks. And when we're running pen testing with such a short window before systems go live, or we're running it on, assets which could be already vulnerable in production, that's a big problem. And we're yet to find a pen tester who actually likes to write reports. So they're a massive, chunk of the pen testing project time. So because the reports arrive so late, there's a serious lost opportunity for engineering teams to start fixing issues sooner, to reduce those relevant risks. And as a result, pen testing is disconnected between the pen testing teams, the engineering teams, and the business teams. They usually have no idea what was actually tested, what was not tested, and the reasons why. And because this deliverable, this pen test report, is a static report, it's a PDF, it's an Excel document, there's really low visibility of those findings. So generally, the pen test team or the external vendor, they'll send the report. It'll get circulated to engineers. They'll pick a few issues that they have time to fix before go live. And then that report just sits there and collects dust on SharePoint, sitting in an email, etc. It's, again, fragmented. Static reports, they make it really difficult to know when those issues have been fixed from a pen testing project, because and why the issues are still open. So again, because unless that information is manually entered into ticketing systems, it sits in, fragmented across the organization with zero visibility as to which issues weren't fixed, why weren't they fixed. And not to mention, these reports, the output of a pen test is generally about 30% of the pen test budget. So for every single project, whether you're paying your external, it's a cost of your running your internal team, or whether you're paying external vendors to run some of these pen tests, there's about a 30% cost which goes just into manually creating and QAing these reports. So when we're talking about these large enterprise pen testing programs who are doing hundreds and hundreds of pen tests a year, that equates to a lot of wasted time, effort, and resources, which could be in the millions of dollars for some of the larger companies. And so yeah, over to you, Scott.
Oh, all right, thanks, Phil. So Phil talked a lot about the kind of trials and tribulations of the pen testing program, and I will say, even in the context of pen testing, those problems don't end with the pen testing workflow. So when you start throwing those reports over the wall to the vulnerability management guys, so you have to actually do something with the reports, and somebody needs to analyze all the data and to do something with it. That's where the vulnerability management team comes in. And it's just as much of a nightmare for the VM team to read the reports as it is for the pen testing teams to actually write the reports. And so what we find is exactly what Phil mentioned, where the report ends up sitting in a SharePoint somewhere, it gets passed around in a PDF document, and then somebody somewhere tries to fix it, and it becomes a challenge trying to track what you actually are fixing, who's doing what, where do those who is actually responsible to fix those different vulnerabilities. So actually connecting the dots between a pen test report and then what you actually need to do as a vulnerability team is very, very difficult as well. And this is a really big problem because generally the data that comes from a pen testing report is actually some of your highest value data, because it's manual tests that are known to have been exploited by your manual testers, whereas all of your other discovery mechanisms tend to be kind of a more mile wide, inch deep type of test. Whereas with pen testing, you know that it's a problem because it's something that a manual test actually happened and was able to dig up, and they have evidence associated with it. And so it becomes a really big challenge as a VM team as to how do you actually get that data, especially at scale when you're trying to manage that as a VM process, in the context of the rest of your organization. And so if you look at a traditional vulnerability management program, you might not even be looking at all of your data. I mean, the traditional vulnerability management really revolves around network scanning. So you throw a tool like Nessus at your infrastructure, and you call that your vulnerability management program. But what we find is as you get bigger, as you get more mature, you have other parts of your technology stack that also need to be assessed. And so then you start throwing new scanners at different parts of your infrastructure. Maybe you start using a Burp Suite to try to do dynamic scanning, and then also start doing penetration testing. And so what you find is that you have all of these different sources of data that are being managed by sometimes different teams, because your pen testing team is not the same team as doing your network scanning. like with your Nessus console, which is also not the same team as that's doing your DevOps CI/CD pipeline vulnerability scanning and management. And so with traditional vulnerability management, we find is that no matter how many tools you have, no matter how big you are or how small you are, most organizations are running their VM programs out of Excel. And so what that really kind of equates to is just an inability to scale the process, because there are so many different users and stakeholders that rely on this data downstream that you need to be able to actually keep up with the speed of the rest of your business. And so same thing as with pen testing. You know, if you're trying to do a pen test once a quarter or once a year, that's a snapshot point in time. You need to be able to transition to a more continuous monitoring approach because it's just industry best practice, and you want to have the latest information all the time. And so what we're trying to do with a tool like Nucleus and with a joint solution like we've combined with AttackForge is to really start expediting the way that this process works and connect the whole pipeline together and get all of the different teams that are responsible plugged in to the same kind of sheet of music, same central repository, so that once everything is in one location, we can start automating different parts of the process. And so what I want to leave you with as far as really what's broken and how we can fix it from a VM side is that we need a way to consolidate everything into one location so that we can actually do something with it. And then we need to start thinking about automation, because without automation, you're not going to be able to scale your program, especially as you start trying to integrate tools where you're looking at penetration test data alongside vulnerability scanner results and alongside, you know, cloud compliance results and things like that. So what we really are trying to do is to kind of turn that whole process on its head and make it a much more efficient and scalable process so that you actually can keep up across your entire business. Which leads us to the actual how we're bridging the gap and what we're trying to do. And so the way we want to kind of present this is sort of chart out that the workflow from the pen testing side kind of through the vulnerability management side. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Stas, who's going to kind of guide us through what this looks like from a pen testing side, and then how we can hook that up to a VM program on the back end.
Okay. Yeah. As Scott said, we need to bridge the gap and bring penetration tested data to vulnerability management, to people who actually can action and track it. The overall purpose of this is to reduce enterprise risk, especially by improving time to remediate for penetration testing vulnerabilities. And integrating penetration testing into vulnerability management brings the data to DevSecOps and make it much easier to automate and much faster to remediate. There's no need to waste time waiting for manual static reports while they will travel through the system from penetration testers to DevSecOps and to engineers. By connecting penetration testing and vulnerability management, we create a centralized, standardized, and consistent approach and language, completely independent of who did the actual testing. And it improves the ability for all involved teams, so business, engineering, security, to collaborate and share knowledge. And now, with the data coming from, in this case, penetration testing data from AttackForge into Nucleus, we have users can track and align status of vulnerabilities between all different streams of vulnerability management across the entire enterprise. And as vulnerabilities are discovered and remediated, that data, that essential data, can travel and be analyzed and processed and used in decision-making with minimal efforts and minimal manual handling. It's become scalable.
And then to kind of add to that, right, you've got this process that historically is pen testers go, they do their thing, they generate a report, and then they email that to somebody who's a representative on the vulnerability management side. The vulnerability manager comes in, and then they email it to somebody else to review, and then they sort of kick off the process from there. So there's not really any collaboration and communication in any substantive way between pen testing and the VM teams. And so what we're really seeing, and we're seeing a trend in this direction as well, beyond just the Nucleus and AttackForge integration, but just in general, enterprises want to be connected. They want that, lack of a better term, I hate using it, they want synergy across their different teams to be able to go in. I know, I had to do it. It's the token important business verbiage, but what and it benefits both sides of the parties. It benefits both parties because for the pen testers, they have a very, very simple, easy way to get information to the VM teams. And the VM teams have a much simpler way of receiving the information so that they can actually do something with it. Because realistically, nobody on the VM side wants to look through these PDF reports. They know that they need to fix it, but it tends to become a lower priority thing because there's no automation built around it. And then across the board, so I mean, what you see happening is that you lose a lot of that visibility of what is coming from your pen testing program because there's a separate segment of your VM program that is dedicated to just pen testing. And there's no way to look at your data across the entire organization, across all of your different tools that you're using for vulnerability discovery. And so kind of to sort of just paint a picture of kind of what an ideal scenario would be and what is totally possible is pen testers are managed, they have their workflows managed within an automated tool set that allows them to manage all of their enterprise pen tests in one place. And then as those pen tests are being completed, they're automatically being fed to the right teams in the on the vulnerability management side. The vulnerability, and it's being prioritized appropriately alongside the rest of the VM vulnerability data. And then as that data is being worked off in either by the vulnerability management team, maybe it needs a retest, maybe some other event needs to happen. So there's a JIRA ticket maybe that automatically gets created as this vulnerability data from the pen test gets flown into or merged into your vulnerability management program. And then as the vulnerability gets triaged or it gets fixed, then that information freely flows right back to the tester that did the test in the first place. And then they can do a test again. And it becomes a living, breathing process and not just we do a snapshot point in time. Let's send over a set of vulnerabilities that we found. It becomes this collaborative process without the teams really having to work together per se. But by just having that free flow, it allows me to go back and forth between the two and really, really start to combine forces to a much more mature program where you can really drive your risk down. And that's really what we're trying to do. And obviously that the side benefit of all of that is that you get really, really great understanding of root causes of issues, and you can make better decisions on where you should focus your effort as opposed to just kind of trying to do shots in the dark, which or just fix everything from a pen test or try to fix every critical and high severity. You need to start having some smarts about how you do it, but you need to enable the pen testing teams to do their jobs and to do it well. But then we just need to make it really easy for them to share information with the VM team so that we can actually do our job and make drive the overall organization risk down. Which leads us to the joint AttackForge and Nucleus integration and how we have enabled that with some of our existing customers. So we work, like I mentioned, AttackForge and Nucleus works together quite frequently. We know each other quite well. And what we find is that this is a really great example of how our mutual customers are actually using Nucleus with AttackForge to drive a really, really beneficial joint solution in a very, very specific and robust way.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So let's look at the challenge for a moment of this particular organization. So this organization, they're a large multinational financial institution. They've got millions of customers all around the world. They've got hundreds of enterprise applications. They develop some of those internally, or they've got external vendors and thousands of engineers around the world building new assets for that organization. This organization already had a penetration testing program, quite mature program, and separately they had a vulnerability management program as well, which is similar to what we've observed with other enterprises, again, running those two parallel but siloed streams. So each program's run independently from each other. The problem is there's no ability to easily share information between their PT program and their VM program. So what they wanted to do was to integrate their PT program data into their VM program And ideally, the outcome is to manage all their known vulnerabilities centrally across the enterprise. That would give them visibility and also help them make informed risk decisions on where they need to focus resources. So this organization engaged both Nucleus and AttackForge to see if we could provide them with a solution to address this specific problem. As a result, AttackForge and Nucleus collaborated together to create a very unique proposition with our two different products that we provide, which would address the current limitation they have across these two different silo programs. And it's this unique proposition that we realized can help many different organizations around the world, as we know that many other enterprises are sitting in the same boat as well.
Yeah, and so the way that it really works is AttackForge has built a push integration into Nucleus, and we have the ability to feed data back and forth between the two platforms. But essentially, pen testers go about their normal enterprise workflow that they manage within AttackForge, and then once they're done with tests and assessments, the data gets pushed directly into Nucleus for analysis by the VM team. And so what we've essentially done in this case with this mutual customer is kind of completely connected the two different value streams in a way that is very, very unique and powerful, because the data is flowing back and forth across different segments of the business, and without really having to coordinate across the two different parts of the business. So the pen testing team is continuing to do what they always have done, albeit in a much more robust way because they're using AttackForge. And then as they're doing their job, the data is just automatically being fed into Nucleus. And then the VM teams are doing their job, which is analyzing, triaging, reporting, and all of the downstream effects that go along with vulnerability management. And so the actual outcome is that we've seen a huge increase in the speed at which vulnerabilities from pen tests get discovered, and then conversely, the speed at which they get remediated. So because the right information is getting to the right people much faster, there's no longer a report that gets sent over that then gets emailed around to different people with red circles over like, hey, can you fix this? What happens is there's a completely automated workflow where the data gets dropped into Nucleus based on the asset that is being affected by the particular vulnerability. A ticket automatically gets routed to the right user to fix the vulnerability automatically. And so it just becomes part of the downstream remediators' general work day in the tools they're already using. And so it allows us to essentially have this free flow of data across the entire pipeline for complete automation of the process. And then as things are getting fixed, as the tickets are getting closed, they're getting pushed back into Nucleus for that central unified tracking view, and then pushed back into AttackForge to take some sort of action on the pen testing team. And so we've essentially built with this combined effort, the ability to really bridge the gap between the two different segments of the business in a really robust way that allows you to actually keep up with the speed at which teams are developing and the speed at which your vulnerabilities are actually being discovered. And so it's enabled a lot of underlying foundational changes to the business for our customer, where they're now able to be in a much better place. They're able to be a lot more confident in the decisions that they make because they have full visibility, and they can measure and track and see the progress and assign specific value to their pen testing program alongside their vulnerability management program as well. And so with that leads us to the end of what we've done. We're coming in right under the gun of 30 minutes. Ben, you should be proud.
Good job. Yeah, so just a couple quick questions we've gotten in the wild recently, which I'd kind of like to address. One of the first ones was, can I get full pen test data such as POC and evidence into Nucleus?
Yeah, I'll fill that one, Stas. Yes, you can. So AttackForge allows organizations to capture all of their traditional vulnerability data as a result of pen testing engagement. All of that data, rich data around descriptions, attack scenarios, recommendations, POCs, individual notes for affected assets, all of that information that you would normally find in those pentest reports can get exported in near real time into Nucleus. So instead of, again, having to wait for those reports to arrive, that information is making its way to the right people almost as it's being discovered.
Okay, we just had a live question come in that says, how does it look when a ticket has been completed, and is this data archived?
Yeah, so I think I can take that one because that's really a like kind of vulnerability management thing. So in the joint solution, there's multiple ways that you can try to manage this. You obviously can create Jira tickets from AttackForge, or you can create Jira tickets from within Nucleus. And I use Jira just because that's kind of a ubiquitous term, but obviously a lot of different ticketing systems are supported. But when a ticket has been completed and the data is archived, at least in the context of Nucleus, what happens is that we get the status of that ticket reflected back into the Nucleus platform, which then conversely gets the status of the ticket reflected back as completed into the AttackForge platform. And so you have that status synced back. From the Nucleus side, we essentially keep the status of the vulnerability the same because you require some sort of retest or validation. There's different ways that you can approach it. You can remediate vulnerabilities via scan. You can do it manually. And so from the Nucleus perspective, the data will only get archived when it either gets approved to be remediated via some sort of manual means, whether that's a retest from AttackForge or some other scan, depending on where the data came from. And that's generally the way that it's handled within the Nucleus platform.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Scott, as well. So from the AttackForge side, as we retrieve that updated information, so where so if a developer has gone into Jira, etc., and said this issue is now closed, and here's my notes as to why I believe it's closed, that data makes its way back into AttackForge, and we now classify it as it's ready for retesting. So that issue now needs to be looked at by the pen testers again to validate that the developer's claims are true. As we do that retest, we generate new evidence based on the outcome of that retest. We generate, which could be screenshots, it could be notes which were captured by the pen tester to indicate whether those issues are really fixed or whether they're not fixed, and then feed that data back into Nucleus as a central repository or the source of truth relating to the security posture of those particular affected assets and those vulnerabilities.
All right, great. Well, I think we're about at time. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. We hope this was worthwhile. Did we just get another question?
We did get another question.
Is there a website link to understand how the pen test works?
Oh yeah, should probably do a shout out. So if you want to learn more about either Nucleus or AttackForge, obviously we're talking about a joint solution to really bring your pen testing data in alongside your VM program. But if you don't have a VM program and you don't have a good handle on managing your pen testing program, obviously we've built tools that do each of those things individually in their own right. And so we're definitely happy to have conversations with you around vulnerability management from the Nucleus side, and then of course the AttackForge side to talk about your pen testing programs. And I'm sure they have links, and I'm sure they'll be happy to talk to you about where you can find more info.
And a really quick, I think, follow up from the previous question. It was asked, what would be the time frame after the ticket has been completed?
Not quite sure on what they're asking there. As far as the time frame for what exactly?
We can probably follow up with that one.
Yeah, we can follow up
later. Again, if you have any additional questions, or if anyone watching on demand has any questions, we definitely welcome you to reach out, whether it be about our integration or anything else. You can find us at NucleusSec. That's nucleussec.com. We have a demo on demand there. We also offer free trials. And you can find out more about AttackForge at attackforge.com, where I believe you can check out a free community version or demo the enterprise version. So again, reach out with any questions. We're definitely happy to help and answer, and we appreciate you attending. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank